Hi, my name is Alex. I'm the host of the Lightleaders podcast and of this YouTube channel. I've done over 200 episodes now on the podcast, and I've collected over 200,000 views on YouTube alone. And I've had that podcast mainly as a passion for most of its time. But recently, I've started coaching people on starting a podcast and a YouTube channel. And as part of it, I've been reflecting on how to adjust the content of this channel so it supports better my business. Through that process, I've looked at a lot of content online like Creator Booth or Dan Coe or different ones because I've been pondering, should I be niching down? Should I change the content much to adjust the business side? And I've learned a lot I would like to share in this video. At the end of the day, spoiler alert, I've decided not to niche too much. And I also think in the industry, there is a little bit too much of an emphasis on you should be niching down. And I will explain to you why in a few different points. So to give a little bit of context, the Lightleaders podcast has gone through many interests, starting from things like meditation, tantra, personal development really overall, and then going into also building communities, then going quite deep into cryptos and decentralized organizations, then going very deeply into raw foods and fruitarian movement. And recently I've been more into spiritual businesses and coaching in particular. And what all of these have in common is that ultimately the Lightleaders is dedicating to supporting the co-creation of the new us, the rise in consciousness that many of us, the choosing ones, are here to do and to support. I also want to share, I started this podcast, it was called Dreamers and Doers, even wider. And when I chose to be really dedicated to the rise in consciousness, that's when I called it the Lightleaders, which is like light workers, but really leaders of the light workers, leaders of the new us. So there's been that common thread. Would you call it a niche? I don't know if it's a niche. It's not as specific as some people would like it to be when they recommend to choose a niche. And at the same time, I'll give a bit of context also. I've been researching on YouTube working with my coach, William, who's been on this podcast and will do another episode soon talking about that too. He actually also encouraged me not to niche too much. So I'll share a bit about the topics we're covering here and how they relate to each other, but also why I don't niche and why maybe if you're in a similar situation, if you're building your business and your content strategy, and you're like, should I niche? Should I not niche? Everyone tells you to niche and you feel it's not right. That video is for you. The third thing I'd like to address is that the content strategy and the offer of your business can be different. And I do believe that there is more value in niching down the offer as there is value in niching down the content. Because in terms of offer, I think it's more important for people to feel like you're really dedicated to that one thing that you're doing really well. However, it can be good to have a multidimensional approach to that thing. So for example, for me, I chose to focus on helping people start their podcast and their YouTube channel. So I'm not anymore coaching people on thriving on raw foods or on finding their purpose, which is things I've done in the past. But if you know I have a healthy lifestyle and you know that I'm very intentional about doing things that we love, you're probably more likely to work with me on building a podcast than, let's imagine, some guy who is successful with his podcast, but he's overweight, he's not working out, he's doing a lot of things he doesn't like just to be successful with his business, because you're not going to be as inspired. So for you, when you have your offer that can be niche, but your content can still be broad, because we're humans and we want to know the person we're connecting to as a coach through a one-on-one or group or online offer, whatever it is. that we can connect to that person, relate to them, we're inspired by them. Usually there is an element of mentorship also, where there are parts where we want to be a little bit like that person, at least in some parts. I also had it when I started working with my coach, William Griffin. He is a successful coach, but there are a lot of coaches online. And I was considering Ted Carr, for example, and similarly, Ted Carr, I know he has a similar lifestyle, so I like that. But then I didn't like the sales content, didn't feel genuine to me. And then when I worked with William, I really loved that he had a really heart-centered approach to sales, on top of just being successful. And also to learn that he's an awakened leader. Like he has the same view of consciousness of who we are. He's also a light worker and defines himself as such. And so these are elements that make me closer to that person. And so if I'm going to work on business, but I know the person has a healthy lifestyle or a healthy relationship, I want to work with them more. So even if you've niched down your offer, which can have a lot of convenience and pros, you can still go broader with your content, especially with something like a podcast or long form content like YouTube videos, where people also want to learn more about you, and it will help to have people like, know, and trust you more. Now, the second point I wanted to mention is that it's really important to be consistent, to be passionate, right? So if you choose a niche that you feel is smart for your business, but it's only in the short term because you want to get more clients this way, or you think you're going to get more of a targeted audience, which, to be honest, makes sense. It can be easier to find your audience where you're niched. And I think it depends on people. But for people like us, light workers, people with a lot of interest, generalists, it often doesn't work so well. And we often niche down because we feel we have to, because we're told to by people on the internet or coaches. And at the end of the day, yes, things can be easier with a niche, totally. But only if you can stay consistent and passionate about it, especially in the context of something like building a podcast. If you're not passionate about the people you're interviewing, if you're not passionate about what you talk about, people are going to feel it and the energy is going to be off. So maybe you've been talking about that one thing through many different angles and you've been super, super deep on that one thing. But if it's boring to you, people won't like it. People won't listen. So I get that in theory it makes sense, but you want to keep that passion. Even great entrepreneurs talk about it. Steve Jobs has an interview when he says, well, you got to love what you do, because if you don't like what you do, you're going to quit when it gets hard. And it's the same with the content you're producing, with the offer you're putting together. So what I tell my clients in general when they want some podcast coaching advice is, yes, there's a value in niching, but you want to stay consistent. You want something that you're still passionate about in 5 years. So think about how niche down you can be, knowing that you want to stay passionate about it in 5 years. So don't niche with something that in 3 months you'll be so bored of talking about it. But at the same time, yes, try to make it more specific if you feel that's you, because you are the niche ultimately. Your frequency is the niche. An example from mine also is in the past 2-3 years, I've had a lot of people on raw foods. And I was tempted at some point to rebrand my podcast. And that's when I launched also the Fruit Feed brand, when I was doing coaching in that area. But I'm happy I didn't rebrand the podcast, because now I'm still loving raw foods. I still have a lot of interviews on this, but it's become less central in the podcast. Things like building a conscious business as maybe half of the episodes now. So I'm happy I didn't rebrand it to the Raw Vegan Podcast, because then I'm kind of stuck there. And if I want to change, it's going to be much harder. So definitely making sure we're still passionate, and like faking a niche because we had the advice won't work, because ultimately consistency is probably more important than niching down. And so finding that area that's specific enough but broad enough that we can stay consistent and passionate. Point number 3 is we are humans. We are humans. So when people connect to us, there is, let's call it performance or business element where people want the result and want you know you're really good at what you're doing in that one area they're hiring you for. So I like the offer to be quite specific. At the same time, when people consume content, especially long form like podcasts or videos on YouTube, there is an element of education they want when they want to learn something, but there is also an element of entertainment or connection that you have with another human being. So there could be 5 people talking about how to build a podcast. And maybe you're going to listen to me just because you relate more with me because of many different things. Similarly, for business advice, I can go to, for example, I will go more to Alex Hormozi because he's buffed and he has a relationship, and so he's not so one-dimensional, than to, for example, William Brown. I've just had him on my podcast. He's crushing it. He's doing really well, and I love what he's doing. I'm very happy for him. But it's harder for me to relate because he lives in Dubai. He's really prioritizing working. And even though he said he's shifting now, his expertise is more in, work hard, get shit done, make a lot of money this way. Or than Sam Ovens, for example, the founder of School, that I admire for many things, but I don't relate as much because he's so different, because he's going to spend like hours in front of a computer when I want to be out in nature. I want to invest in my relationship, in my health, do my meditations, all these things. That's why I hired my coach, William Griffin, because he's more connected to that. People want to relate. We are humans. We want to connect with other humans, especially multidimensional people like us, the light workers, the leaders of the new earth. We know that heart, that human connection is really important also in the work we do. So talking about different things, different topics will make you more relatable. As long as people still feel you're an expert in the field that you have your business and you're offering, they will most likely trust you more if they feel they can relate and learn about other aspects of who you are. So in my case, maybe some people like that when I coach them on a podcast, I'm also interested in cryptos, and maybe I can accept crypto payment if they want to do a podcast on cryptos. Or maybe they attracted by the fact that I'm interested in community building, in being healthy, and they want to connect to that also, to that essence too. I'm not like a hustler. Again, nothing wrong with that, but I'm not. I do the work. I show up consistently, but I also prioritize my mental health, my physical health, and my relationships on par with the business growth, and people can be attracted to that. So showing your human side, especially in the world of social media and of podcasting and YouTube, is very important. And we are multidimensional people. Now, if you feel like you're really a specialist at heart, go for it. But if you don't, then I don't feel it's wise to force yourself into that niche. And that kind of appears a little bit as also. Point number 4 is that the world is changing fast. We can see it with AI. For example, doing podcasting now is very different than 3 years ago. 3 years ago, when I had my podcast, if I wanted to promote it well and do clips, I was actually hiring a VA that was working for me almost full time, that would pay $1,000 every month. So he would do the editing of my podcasts. He would create clips, write down the subtitles, all of this. Now, all of this can be taken care of by AI. The world is changing. Jobs are being replaced. New jobs are being created. Because to me, it's not that AI is going to destroy all the jobs. It's just going to take on the most repetitive tasks for now, and then new jobs become created to work with that new landscape on the workplace. And when AI starts doing more evolved things, there will still be roles around managing things, or maybe productivity things are more taken on by AI, and there's more work to do in for yoga teachers or other massage therapists or things that will still remain. Anyway, I'm not going to go too deep on how the world is changing with AI, but we know the world is changing fast. And when you have a following that connects to you on a human level and multidimensionally, it is easier to take them on a new journey. So for example, for me, for a while, I was not so interested in business, in making money, especially because I was more focused on building communities. And with raising money, it's not my role to make money. It's like some people have money, they will join the cause and fund the project. What happened in the past few years is there's been a lot of delays in that and complications, and I actually changed on this and thought, okay, I actually feel like it's my role to build businesses, make money, and I've gone that route, taking more of the business route. And I'm here to share with people why I've seen that the world is changing, but sometimes collapsing as fast as we would think. Many people in crypto 10 years ago, they were thinking, oh, the dollar is going to collapse tomorrow because it's so unstable and it's built on a house of cards, which is true, but we're still using fiat currency today. And sometimes the resilience of our old paradigm is pretty impressive. When you discover it, you think things are going to collapse tomorrow. Big pharma, some institutions, the dollar, and maybe a few years later, they're still there. So I've decided to play a bit more the game in the bridge where it's still new paradigm, but I still play with things like fiat currencies. I'm not too dogmatic about only accepting cryptos for my coaching, for example, because the systems aren't ready also. Similarly with social media, I went back on YouTube and on Instagram, despite the censorship. I've had episodes censored during the pandemic, and despite the censorship, I was like, okay, I'm going to go on Instagram, on YouTube. I'm going to play that game. I know they're taking people's attention. I know they're censoring. I'll still do it because that's where people are at the moment. Also where I'm at. I love YouTube. I'm so grateful for it. I'm learning so much on it. Through the journey of having people relate to you as a human and liking you for that and trusting you for that, when the world changes, you can keep your audience and you can evolve with them. You can even invite them to evolve. Like I've done, I invite people now, if they feel aligned, to also start a conscious business and to be very widely successful with it and make a lot of money that they can then funnel into the new paradigm. So when we do that, we're more resilient than someone, let's say, who's been super specialist into, let's say, podcast editing. Well, first, going back to point number 2, I'm going to get bored. I'm not so happy to spend hours and hours talking about podcast editing. And then I become a little bit like a humanized version of a robot or even, let's say, a search engine where you can get answers through me, but you don't really know who I am deep down, and it's harder to relate. And so if I do that and then the world changes and all of a sudden we don't really need podcast editors, which actually is already happening to a certain extent. A lot of the podcast editing is being done by AI. A year from now, if you shoot with 3 cameras, it'd be really easy to do all the perfect edits. It's all done automatically. Don't need a podcast editor for that anymore. That's why what I tell to my clients is now you put a couple of hours after a podcast in post-production, you have something that would have taken 20 hours to a VA 3 or 4 years ago. Anyway, back to the topic. If I was to do that, and then the landscape is changing and all my content is about how to edit a podcast, and then no one needs that anymore, who's going to follow me on the next journey? Not that many, because they've connected to me on that one-dimensional thing. So that's another thing that made me want to not to be too specific, and the world is going to evolve faster and faster. Number 5 is something really important to me, is simply freedom. Is the freedom to talk about what I want to talk about when I want to talk about it, to be open to opportunities. So for example, now I'm talking more about conscious businesses, but I have the opportunity that came to me to do an interview with Dr. Morse, who's the OG of the raw food community. So I'm not going to turn that down because it's not fitting my new niche, because I'm really excited about it. And that's an amazing opportunity. I want to have that freedom. If tomorrow I meet someone who's so fascinating on crypto, right? If I meet, I don't know, Vitalik and I can have him on the podcast, I definitely want to have him on the podcast. So I want to have that freedom. And in the podcast world, actually, a lot of the top podcasts are really just people who interview who they're curious about. Joe Rogan, Tom Bilyeu, all of these, they're not super niched. Now, I hear the arguments of the niched part, and they also make sense. Again, I'm not against niching. I'm only for niching if it's really authentic for you and if it's something you feel you can be passionate about for a really long time. It's something you feel you can stick around for a really long time and be confident and be consistent. So if you do that, by all means niche, and it might make your life easier in the short term. So now I hope that was helpful. I hope that gives you the confidence to do what you love, to be consistent, to do what you're excited about, what feels authentic to you, and to produce content this way without feeling like you're a square that needs to be fitted inside a round hole. I also want to share that at the moment I'm coaching people on starting their podcast or up-leveling the ones they currently have, or their YouTube channel. And I'm doing free sessions. So if you want to reach out to me, you can just send me the DM podcast on Instagram or Telegram. I'll put the links in the description and we can just have a conversation. I'd be more than happy to help other light workers and leaders of the new earth to speak their voice, to share the gifts with the world in a way that is the way of the world we live in, which is social media, online. That's how we can have a lot of impact. If you have any questions or specific comments, you can let me know in the comments of the YouTube video. I'd love to know, have you been thinking about niching down? Have you felt like you have to, but you haven't felt comfortable with it? Is that something that resonates? Please let me know. And you'll find all the links in the description below to get in touch with me or to join our free Telegram group. You can like this video. I send much love to you. And I hope that you also find a way to share your gift, to speak your voice that feels authentic, that feels fun, that feels like something you can do for a long time and have a lot of impact with. So you can do here on Earth what you came here to do as a light worker and help the rising consciousness of our planet. I'll be staying active with this channel, doing what I love, the interviews, some solo episodes, some new things. So stay tuned. And again, the reason I'm doing this is to share a voice on how we can raise the consciousness of our planet together. Much love.